All right. Well, welcome officially, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the Demystifying the Statement of Purpose and Personal Statement for Grad School Applications workshop. We are very excited to have Erin Tody back with us today, who is an assistant director and writing consultant. I'm not going to say too much about her because I'm actually going to invite one of our other colleagues and partners, Alana from the Writing Center, to please formally introduce her.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you all for being here. We are excited for Erin Tody to be here and present this wonderful session for you all. Erin is the Assistant Director of the University Honors Program at Iowa State University. She earned her BA in French and International Studies and her MA in Applied Linguistics. Erin has taught a range of composition, linguistics, and academic writing courses in different domestic and international higher education contexts. Her research interests center on how discourse analysis methodologies can be meaningfully used in teaching academic writing, especially to support historically marginalized, for example, first generation, low income, and underrepresented students writing high stakes self-promotional genres, such as the statement of purpose for graduate school. Thank you all again for being here, and I will turn it over to Erin.
Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for the very kind introduction and welcome. For all of our attendees, what my bio basically means is that I want to make sure you know how to do the things so that you can get into the places you want to go. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So I am going to start off by sharing a couple links in the chat to make sure that you all have access to the tools and materials for today. The first one is a link to a Google Drive folder where I've included today's PowerPoint presentation and then also 3 brainstorming worksheets for the statement of purpose for grad school applications, personal statement brainstorming for medical school, and also personal statement for law school. We'll hit on all 3 of those areas today, but feel free to use these worksheets. Please also feel free to share them with other folks that you know who are applying to these different types of programs. The next resource that I want to share is an open educational resource that I created about statements of purpose specifically for master's and PhD programs. We're going to talk through some of this resource today. But this resource I would love for you to take and use and share with everyone. It is intentionally an open educational resource, which means it's free for everyone to use. If you have questions about it, you're also welcome to reach out to me at any time. I'm going to put my email into the chat, and I'd be happy to support you in that way. For today's presentation, I would like to make this as much of an interactive conversation as possible. So if you have questions at any time, feel free to throw them into the chat. Please also feel free to raise your hand, or if I'm not seeing that, go ahead and you can interrupt me. Nothing I'm saying is as important as the question that you have. We're also going to have some time for brainstorming. So just be prepared that I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of thinking about your own experiences, motivations, and goals, and then also share some of that out loud as you're comfortable. So let's go ahead and get started. I am going to share my screen because I find that visuals help me stay a little bit focused, but I promise that this is not going to be like death by PowerPoint for an hour and a half because, well, I don't know that my voice will last that long and that kind of sounds boring. So again, we're going to be talking about demystifying statements of purpose and personal statements for different types of graduate school applications today. This resource I already put in the chat. I can pull it back up if anybody needs it. But the place I want to start today is by identifying a naming problem. So you'll notice in the title I mentioned statements of purpose and personal statements. And we have a little bit of an issue here when it comes to graduate school applications because you might see in different types of applications different language being used. So when you apply to medical school or law school, if that's your path, you're going to be asked to write a personal statement. And that is a very particular type of piece of writing that you're going to do. But if you're applying to a master's program or a PhD program, you might be asked to write a statement of purpose. I'm going to call this an SOP today. That does not mean standard operating procedure for those of you who are like engineers or in STEM, but SOP is our statement of purpose. So if you're applying, let's say, to an environmental sciences PhD program, you might see, please upload a statement of purpose. Please upload a personal statement. So the question is, well, what's the difference between these two documents? And then it gets a little bit more complex because we have schools like the University of Michigan that ask you to upload an academic statement of purpose and a personal history statement. So what's the difference? How are they similar? How are they different? Well, I will say at one level, sometimes schools use these terms interchangeably to mean the exact same thing. Then there are other schools that will distinguish between the two documents. I'm going to use the language of statement of purpose today when we talk about applying to master's and PhD programs, because based on my research, I found that this statement of purpose is different than the personal statement. And we're going to dig around in that and sort of explore it and think about what these differences are. But just know that I'm going to separate these two different documents and what they mean. Before we jump into talking about graduate school applications and how these documents are positioned in them, I actually want to know a little bit more about you all. So I'm going to ask you all to go ahead and, if you're willing to share, put into the chat your year and then also what you're studying. And if you'd like to share what you think you want to be applying for in the future. I'd like to get a sense of who's in the room, the different majors, and what our goals are. Okay, it's fun when they all come in at the same time. So we have a history major going to law school, criminal justice, thinking law school, psychology, sociology, a PhD in clinical psych, okay, history, poli-sci, law school, psychology, thinking about MSW, awesome. Psychology student thinking about PhD or PsyD. Education, looking at MSW. Okay, accounting, clinical psych. Okay, so a pharmacy program or a PhD. So for justice, I don't specifically have questions for a PharmD application, but I think that the medical school brainstorming questions will get you started in that direction today, and this will still be useful. Okay, another med school, more social work. I love the presence of all the students who want to do social work. That's awesome. In my next life, I'm going to do a social work degree. Okay, communication studies. Oh, a screenwriting master's and film. Very cool. So I'm guessing maybe like an MFA, urban studies, urban leadership, clinical psych. Okay, there's a very cool range of majors here, and I'm excited to see that there's interest in masters and PhDs and law school and med school. We're going to hit on all of those today. So I appreciate you all sharing these. Also, what a cool range of topics that you want to study. So the way we're going to go about this is I'm going to talk about each of these different types of applications, and then we're going to specifically focus in on the essay that's included. So I'm going to start by talking about the graduate school application. And so what I mean by this are master's and PhD programs. But then we're going to sort of rinse and repeat and do the same thing for medical school and law school. So when we're applying for graduate school, we have a set of materials that we have to upload. This slide shows us sort of the broad list of these types of materials. There's often an online application, well, not often, there's always an online application that you need to fill out with your demographic information. That's where you upload all of your files. You'll need to submit transcripts. They might be official, they might be unofficial, it does depend on the school. You'll need to upload a CV or a resume. The distinction I'll make here is that a resume is typically one page, and it's typically targeted for industry, discussing your educational and professional experiences. A CV is a much longer, more comprehensive version. So what I would say for master's and PhD programs is that there might not be a page limit when you upload your resume or CV. Don't feel like you have to start taking things off just to keep it one page. It can be longer. If you're applying for a master's or PhD, you might need to take the GRE. This is a little bit unpredictable. We've seen a decline in the programs that are requiring the GRE, but occasionally some programs do require that. It's going to be less common. I don't know that I've seen it for a master's of social work. And for masters of accounting, you might have a separate exam that you need to take, but I'm not sure, so I'd need to double check. You will need to upload the names and emails of 3 people who can write you letters of recommendation. These 3 folks should be people who know you in an academic and professional capacity. So it can't be your mom, it can't be a close family member or a close friend. I would recommend somebody who is at an institution where you have worked, who can speak to your ability to be successful in the classroom, do research successfully, maybe a supervisor. These would all be good folks who could write you a letter of recommendation. And then we have this statement of purpose, this essay you need to write, but what exactly should it cover? Okay, Austin, before we go on to the SOP, I see your comment. You're saying a lot of psych programs suggest the psychology subject GRE, but is optional for a lot of programs. Yes, there's this challenge of whether to do the test, if it's optional or not. I'm going to direct you to talk to your faculty. If they say that the GRE is optional and they don't necessarily recommend like a specific subject test, I don't know that people really care about it, and I don't know that it's worth your time to study and pay the money to take it. But I would like you to talk to faculty in your discipline to see what they recommend, because this could be a disciplinary difference. So if we go back to the statement of purpose, I want you to think holistically about the things that you're uploading here. The transcript and the CV or resume are going to help us understand the breadth of your experiences. How have you done in your classes? What are the variety of different types of activities that you've done? The letters of recommendation are going to vouch for your credibility. And so the statement of purpose then must have another function or feature. If we've already talked about the breadth of your experiences, this SOP must be doing something else. And so really, I would say this is the heart of your application. This is where we're really getting to the depth of your experiences, but also to your motivation and your goals, because that's not included anywhere else in the application. There's no other spot typically in the online application to upload, specifically, these are my goals, unless it's like a supplemental question that maybe is tied to the statement of purpose. So before we talk about the statement of purpose, let's look at a couple of prompts to think about how might we respond if this was a prompt that we were given. So I'm going to show 2 different prompts. I would like you to read these and think about what might you say if this was a prompt you were given, and then we're just going to have a short little discussion about this. So go ahead and take a minute to read this first prompt. Okay, and then let's read the second prompt. Okay, so based on this, what are you supposed to write about? Let me stop sharing so we can see one another. If this was your prompt, what would you say? What might you include?
Probably like relevant coursework, any research experience that you've had, maybe like professional work that you've done that's related to the field, if that can play a role into it, and maybe just like personal like experience that motivates you to apply there, like what in your life has like caused you to think that you're a good fit for the place.
Okay, so Austin, you said some really important things here. Experiences. Now, our experiences are also covered in our CV or resume. And so I would say, yes, we definitely talk about experiences and then something else is going to happen. But I liked the language that you're using of how do our experiences help us show that we're a good fit for the program. So I think you've got to start on the right track here. Gianna talks about in the chat why I chose my major, how my research ties into my graduate school and career goals. Ding, ding, ding. This is where you want to talk about your career goals and the thing you want to do. That isn't present anywhere in any of the other documents you submit. Okay, Nicole talks about how it says experiences encourage me to pursue a certain program and what I've done to achieve my goals. Notice the cause and effect here, how these experiences encouraged me to do this thing. That's cause and effect. And so this is where we want to start with Austin's idea of talk about what we've done and then think about how is that then led us to want to apply to this. Okay, Tatiana talks about your purpose for applying, why you picked one program, how the program will help benefit society. Okay, instead of going straight into the workforce. Absolutely. So you will need to make your personal statement and, well, statement of purpose specific for each program that you're applying to. Now, do not panic. What you can do is tailor it for one, write it for one school, and then you can tailor it for each of your other schools, and that task usually isn't too challenging. Anything else we might want to address in our statement of purpose?
Not necessarily, but it does it makes sense that you would want to it's almost like a how are you going to contribute to our school's positive outcomes? Like how are you going to contribute to what we're already doing here and enhance our system?
Mhm. Yeah, and that ends up being really interesting and challenging, whether you overtly make those statements or whether that is a little bit more implied. That might be something that you want to sit and think about what you're most comfortable with. I would also encourage you to think about how is the program a good fit for you and your interests and your goals? What about talking about your research interests? If you're going to go into a PhD program, you're probably going because you're interested in research. If you are not interested in research, you should not go into a PhD program because a PhD is preparing you to do research. So talking about that. Anything else that's coming to mind for anyone? Okay, let's dig into this a little bit more because I think we've hit all of the main points. And so I like where everyone's brain is with thinking about these statements of purpose for master's and PhD programs. So before you get too caught up in this slide, I just want to give you a little bit of background, and that is I've had this very strange obsession with statements of purpose for almost a decade now. And that's because I was living and working in Istanbul, and I was helping students apply for graduate programs. And they were writing their statements of purpose and their personal statements, and they were all really struggling with it. And one of my jobs was to give them feedback. And I thought, well, I want to make sure I understand this, so I'm going to go online and look for guidance. Friends, there was not good guidance online. The guidance was make sure you proofread, make sure you have someone read it, say something meaningful, tell a story. Well, those are very vague general statements that don't actually help anyone understand what they should be writing about. So I decided I needed to do the research and figure out what we were actually supposed to be writing about. So when it was in graduate school, I was able to do an analysis of 192 statements of purpose that were written by students who were accepted into master's and PhD programs across 36 different disciplines. Now that's really important because if I'm going to tell you how to write a statement of purpose, it shouldn't just be influenced by one discipline. So after looking at all these statements of purpose, I did a qualitative analysis. And what I found is that writers do these three things in their SOP. They talk about their experiences, they talk about their motivation, and they talk about their fit to program. Which is what you all talked about, and I think what our prompts are helping us to see. What I can say is that in using this framework over the last 5 to 7 years, this framework does seem to align with the majority of prompts that we see for statements of purpose for masters and PhDs applications. But we can also look at this and think about your experiences, motivation, and fit to program as being sort of a chronological talk about your past experiences, how they've influenced your present goals, and how that aligns with your future goals and why you would want to go to a particular program. And the other thing that we started maybe gently touching on with Austin's comment was thinking about this idea of cause and effect. So these aren't just three things that you just have to talk about, but you're showing the relationship between the ideas and the experiences. So because you've had certain experiences, that has informed your interest in graduate school and or a professional degree and or particular research, or maybe helped you understand what you didn't want to do, so then you know you want to go in another direction. And now, because you have these research interests, these career goals, these objectives you want to achieve, that's informing your decision to pursue a particular graduate degree at a particular institution with particular faculty. So I think that's one of the key things that the statement of purpose does is it doesn't just address the what of the experience, but it also addresses the so what. Some of you also mentioned this idea of bringing in personal experience, and you can absolutely bring in personal experience as it is motivating these career goals and research objectives that you might have. Now, I will caution you in being careful with how much you share about your lived experience. We are often inspired to do things based on lived experiences, often when they have been adverse. We want to make sure that things are better for someone else. And I think that is a remarkable quality. And I want you to hold on to that. And then I also want you to think about who needs to know all the aspects of your story. Who do you feel comfortable sharing that with? And what part of the story can you share to help show a cause and effect, or, there's this catalyst without maybe oversharing about the experience. That can get a little bit tricky, but here's where I would say you really want someone to help to read through this and give you some feedback to make sure that you're within those bounds. Because of the number of folks who are interested in MSW programs and psychology programs, this is something that we hear from folks in psych about just thinking about what are those boundaries of what is best to share versus not to share in an application. Okay, let's go ahead then and dig into this framework a little bit more. So we're going to start by actually thinking about motivation. And the reason that I start with motivation is because I found that if I ask students to just start by thinking about their experiences, we get really caught up in thinking about, here's what I've done, I've done X, Y, and Z. But we don't always move into the space of what do we want to do? What are our goals? What are our aspirations? So I want us to start with that because the motivation is really the heart of the statement of purpose. And when I say motivation, what I'm really talking about is your purpose for wanting to pursue a graduate degree, which is often related to specific research interests and or career objectives. Now, I do want to note for some professional degrees like the MSW, your motivation is going to really fit strongly into these career objectives. You're probably going to de-emphasize this research focus since the MSW is not a research focused degree. That doesn't mean you can't talk about having research interests, but you'll lean more fully into discussing these career objectives that you have. So to get you thinking about what you might say for your motivation, I'm going to ask you all to spend just a couple minutes jotting down a few ideas to address any of these questions. So you're going to start brainstorming a little bit. I want you to think about, why do you want to go to graduate school? What do you want to study and why do you want to study that thing? Where does this motivation come from? Did it come from content you learned in a course? Did it come from a lived experience? Did it come from a professional experience? Did it come from research? Did it come from a variety of those places? And then I want you to think about, what kind of an impact do you want to have on your career? Now, regardless of whether you're applying for med school, law school, or a master's or a PhD, I would like you to spend a couple minutes just doing some reflection here, because I think this is where we really want to start in thinking about why graduate school. So let's just take a few minutes and then we'll see if some folks want to share out in just a few minutes.